This is the General Motors Norwood assembly plant in 1960. During that decade, it was home to the production of the Chevrolet Bel Air, along with Chevrolet's flagship, the Impala. In those days, people were still at the heart of the manufacturing process. Each worker took pride in the craft and in every car that left the line. Right now, you're seeing the assembly of the 4.6-liter V8 turbo-fire engine. These Chevrolets were built from about 14,000 individual parts. By comparison, today's cars often have more than 30,000 parts, a sign of how much more complex modern vehicles have become. At its busiest, the Norwood plant in Ohio employed over 9,000 people. Production began here in 1923 and continued until the plant closed in 1987. This General Motors plant built far more than just the Bel Air and Impala. Rolling down these lines were Chevrolets like the Biscayne, Caprice, and Camaro, along with the Pontiac Firebird and Buick Apollo. At the time this film was made, Chevrolet alone was turning out more than 1.6 million cars a year, each offered in a wide range of colors and trims. In those years, General Motors stood as the largest car company in the world, with well-known divisions such as Buick, Cadillac, Pontiac, and Oldsmobile.
For the full-size Chevrolet alone,
For the full-size Chevrolet, buyers could choose from 5 different engines, 5 transmissions, 7 body styles, and 3 trim levels. There were 14 exterior colors, dozens of interior fabrics, and an almost endless list of luxury and performance options. Quality checks were exacting. This machine could measure dimensions down to 1/10,000th of an inch. To keep it honest, workers would even test it with undersized parts. It's a clear reminder of how much automobile factories have changed and advanced since those days. The Impala, the car you're watching take shape here, was Chevrolet's flagship model and one of the best-selling American-made cars of its time. That crown has since passed to the Ford F-Series pickup trucks. Once the bodywork was finished, it moved into the paint shop. Notice how in those days, painters worked without protective masks. After painting came what the factory called the marriage, the moment when body and chassis were joined together. The engine, gearbox, drive shafts, axles, fuel tank, and many other parts weren't fitted one at a time, but installed all at once in a single, coordinated process. The assembly line relied on timing, teamwork, and strict organization. The method remains similar today, though robots and computer systems now handle much of the precision work. Even back in the 1960s, the wheels were mounted to the chassis before the body was lowered into place. Buyers could choose from thousands of color combinations then, but today's automakers keep choices limited to reduce costs. In the 1960s, the main line was packed with workers, far more than you'd see on a modern floor. Every Chevrolet was assembled from countless parts supplied by outside companies piece by piece until the finished car rolled off the line. Women worked here too, though they made up only about 10% of the workforce. Today, that figure is closer to 25%. Once assembled, each Chevrolet Impala went straight to testing. On the dynamometer, engine performance and all controls were checked from the driver's seat. Notice how the gauges steady under load as the rollers spin beneath the wheels. After that, inspectors put the cars through waterproofing tests, spraying them with heavy showers to make sure not a single drop leaked inside. At the end of quality control, a test pass sticker was added, and dealers performed their own checks, polishing and even scenting the cars before delivery. The Norwood plant wasn't without its troubles. Workers went on strike several times, including a record 174-day strike in 1972, the longest in GM's history, and 1,100 partially completed cars had to be scrapped or disposed of because updating them wasn't economically feasible. Now we move back to Michigan. The Michigan truck plant proudly carried the motto, "First in quality and first in pride." At this facility, Ford was building not only the Bronco, but also the F-150 light truck. From 1987 to 1991, the fourth-generation Ford Bronco was assembled here, with 54,000 units built in 1990 alone. At the same time, the eighth-generation Ford F-150 was rolling off the line. Here, the body was lowered onto the chassis, complete with its finished engine. Workers at the Michigan plant attached the hood, installed the windows, and completed the entire interior. Watch how each step locks into the next until the vehicle is ready to head out onto the roads of America. At the end of the assembly line, chrome emblems and logos were carefully bonded in place and polished to a shine, giving each vehicle its final identity. A senior factory worker, his gray hair a mark of decades on the line, signed off on the output quality control, a position earned through years of skill and dedication. With his approval, the Ford Broncos and Ford F-15s were ready to begin their service on America's roads. In 1995, Ford built more Broncos than in any other year, 37,600 units. Just 1 year later, production stopped altogether, and the Bronco would not return until 2021, when the sixth generation went into production. One of the most important steps in assembly was known as the marriage, when the body was joined with the engine, gearbox, drive shafts, and axles all at once. That same year, seats were fitted using a manipulator arm, while work continued underneath on wiring, chassis assembly, and bolted components. Even then, bumpers were designed for quick and precise installation, much like in today's factories. By 1994, the Bronco lineup was powered entirely by V8 engines, with the 4.9-liter inline-six retired from production. Quality control was meticulous, carried out right at the end of the main line. Among all Broncos, the first generation from 1977 had earned a reputation as the most reliable, with its sturdy frame and heavy-duty components. For many owners, these Broncos were the most dependable vehicles they had ever driven. In the 1990s, Ford production at the Michigan assembly plant followed a highly coordinated routine. Bodywork, welding, and finishing were done with care, followed by sealant applications along each joint. Every shell was dipped in an anti-corrosion tank, then sent for painting, a process already handled automatically by spray machines more than 30 years ago. In 1990 alone, over 33,000 Broncos were built within these walls. This was the fifth-generation Bronco, built until 1996, when the model line was retired and replaced by the Ford Expedition in 1997. Ford stated that the decision had nothing to do with the infamous O.J. Simpson police chase. Bronco sales were already in decline before that event. On the main assembly line, workers installed dashboards, connected wiring, fitted wheels, and more. Adhesive was applied to the front windows, which were pressed into place by 2 factory workers. Elsewhere in the plant, chassis construction carried on. Engines were built separately on dedicated lines and delivered to the main assembly line at precise intervals to be mounted onto chassis frames. Most employees wore safety goggles, gloves, and protective overalls as they worked. The fifth-generation Bronco carried forward the 4.9-liter inline-six, along with the 5.0-liter and 5.8-liter V8 engines from its predecessor. Once the body was joined with the chassis and engine, the line moved on. Lights were wired, bumpers installed, and finally each vehicle was tested on the dynamometer, where engine performance, gearbox operation, and even headlight alignment were adjusted with care. From here, the story shifts to Coventry, England, and the historic Browns Lane factory. In the 1960s, this was Jaguar's main production site, known worldwide for refined engineering and elegant design. The car in production here is the Jaguar Mark II sedan, built between 1959 and 1967, with roughly 85,000 units produced. In this footage, aluminum cylinder head castings are being loaded onto the production track, marking the start of another chapter in British automotive history. Each casting went through a series of precise machining steps. Hemispherical combustion chambers were cut one at a time, shaping the character and performance of the engine. One of the first operations was machining the camshaft guides. To install the hard steel valve and tappet guides, the cylinder head was heated in an oven, the thermal expansion allowing the metal to widen just enough for the guides to be pressed in securely. Other operations drilled vertical holes in a single pass, ensuring perfect alignment. Once cooled, machining of the valve guides and seats continued with exact accuracy. The cylinder head was then polished until its surface gleamed. To keep it clean, high-pressure water jets flushed away debris, and compressed air removed any remaining swarf. Cooling channels inside the head were sealed and filled with air before the entire piece was submerged in water, a vital test for leaks or cracks. A thin skim was then machined from the face of the head to create a perfectly flat sealing surface. Cylinder blocks made from high-grade cast iron were produced with the same precision. Much of the work was carried out by automated equipment to maintain consistency. Once inspected, any head that passed was ready to be mounted on its engine block. The process you see now is gear hobbing, where the teeth of a blank gear slowly take shape, cut with meticulous accuracy. After all machining was complete, every dimension was measured with extreme care, each surface and angle checked to within 0.02 of an inch. Finally, the main bearings were machined to the highest standards with a skilled operator running two machines at once. The big end journals were machined in much the same way as the main bearings, held to the same exacting standards. Once this work was complete, the crankshaft was given a static balance check to ensure smooth rotation. If any imbalance appeared, tiny amounts of excess metal were carefully removed from the crankshaft webs, and the test repeated until balance was perfect. Both the big end and main bearings were then ground to extremely fine tolerances using high-speed carborundum wheels, leaving a mirror-smooth finish. Each oil flow hole on the big end journals was then countersunk by hand with a fine file, improving lubrication during operation. In the final stages, skilled hands and machines worked together to lap and polish every bearing surface. To reveal any hidden flaws, the crankshaft was magnetized and coated with a special ink, making even the tiniest cracks visible to the eye. Only flawless crankshafts passed. A second balance check followed, this time dynamic, confirming stability at high speeds. Again, any excess metal was removed until the reading was exact. After one last inspection, the crankshaft was cleared for engine assembly. On the main assembly track, sub-assembly stations supplied components in a constant rhythm. At one station, the crankshaft, flywheel, and clutch were fitted together as a unit, each part numbered and cataloged, then separated so the exact matched pieces could be reunited later. The flywheel was attached to the crankshaft and aligned with care, followed by the clutch assembly, bolted firmly into place. Before the cylinder head could be fitted, tappet clearances were checked and adjusted. Once set, the head was lowered onto the block and torqued down. The exhaust and inlet valves had already been lapped into their seats, ensuring a perfect seal. Throughout the process, quality came first. One inspector oversaw the work of every 9 operators, maintaining constant vigilance. The gearbox faced its own strict testing inside a soundproof booth, where sensitive instruments and trained ears picked up any irregularities during acceleration and braking cycles. Once cleared, the gearbox was bolted directly to the engine. With the two joined, the sump was filled with oil in preparation for live testing. Every engine then underwent a demanding bench test before approval. It began with a 3-hour run at 1,500 revolutions per minute to let the components bed in. The pace then varied through multiple speeds and loads, up to 3,500 RPM, simulating real-world driving conditions. On the main assembly line, the front axle and suspension system were built as a complete unit, ready to meet the chassis. Both front and rear axles, already fitted with disc brakes, were mounted on a trestle to hold everything in perfect alignment. The engine and gearbox followed, with a final inspection to confirm proper fit and secure fastenings. In the paint shop, the body shell was mounted on a rig capable of full 360-degree rotation. The transmission shaft was connected, linking powertrain to drivetrain. Remarkably, even at this stage, many of these tasks were still carried out by hand, relying on the precision and experience of skilled workers. The body next moved through a washing and phosphating stage, removing any remaining contaminants and etching the surface so paint would adhere properly. Metal finishing was done by hand, smoothing away even the smallest imperfections. The shell was then dipped in primer paint, protecting every surface, even those hidden from view, from rust. Once primed, it was rubbed down by hand again. A sealer coat followed, and the body was baked in an oven to harden and cure the finish. After cooling, the painted shell was vacuumed and hand-rubbed once more to remove every trace of dust, leaving a flawless surface. When spraying and inspection were complete, it returned to the assembly line. Here, 2 workers fitted the windows with care, followed by chrome door and window catches. Jaguar's distinctive front radiator grille was then installed as the car's signature touch. From there, the wiring harness was fitted, powering the entire electrical system. Felt insulation was added inside the shell to reduce heat and road noise, creating a quieter, more comfortable ride. Wiring the dashboard with its many switches and instruments required precise, steady hands, a task often entrusted to female workers for their fine motor skills. Mounting pads were placed between the body and chassis to minimize vibration and improve comfort. Heavy chrome bumpers and overriders followed, adding both strength and elegance. The wheel, selected to match the buyer's order, were mounted, and an adjustable steering wheel was installed to suit the driver's preference. With these major components in place, the car could now rest on its own 4 wheels for the first time. The fuel tank was filled, and the vehicle drove under its own power to the trim and finish line. At Jaguar, trimming was deliberately done at this later stage to avoid any damage to the interior during earlier assembly, a method few other manufacturers adopted. Each Jaguar interior required around 3 full hides of leather. Every hide was carefully selected, matched for color and grain, and inspected to avoid blemishes or imperfections. In the dedicated trim shop, staffed with a high proportion of skilled craftsmen, every leather-covered part was shaped and prepared with precision. The woodwork was equally distinctive. Each set of veneers was individually matched, with Jaguar's own workshops producing the richly grained finishes that became a brand hallmark. Thick color-matched carpeting lined the floor, while steel-framed seats, padded with foam rubber, were fitted almost at the very end of production. Buyers could even specify reclining seat mechanisms, adjustable to any position. At this stage, the car faced a meticulous inspection of both its exterior and interior. Any needed adjustments were swiftly carried out by expert technicians. Finally, the Jaguar was ready to leave Brown's Lane. Each Mark I underwent a rigorous 30-mile road test, with performance closely monitored and fine adjustments made to ensure perfect operation. The most powerful variants produced up to 220 horsepower, and more than 30,000 cars were built with the 3.8-liter engine, one of Jaguar's most important models. A second road test followed, this time on the open road with a different driver. Only when he was satisfied would the car be cleared for delivery, often within a day or 2. The same factory also produced the legendary Jaguar E-Type between 1961 and 1975. Around 72,000 were built, winning worldwide acclaim for performance and design. Brown's Lane eventually closed in 2005, marking the end of an era in British automotive history. Today, Jaguar continues to reinvent itself under new ownership, reshaping its identity for the future. From Coventry, the story shifts to Germany, and the Volkswagen factory at Emden. In 1974, production of the iconic Beetle was in full swing, with an astonishing 6,800 cars built each day. Officially, they were sold only in West Germany and other Western European markets. But before the Berlin Wall went up in 1961, the border between East and West was less strictly controlled, and some Beetles crossed over. By the 1970s, Volkswagen accounted for nearly half of all cars built in West Germany. In 1968, the Type 1 officially gained its now famous name, the Beetle, from the German Der Käfer. Between 1940 and 2003, production reached an incredible 23 million worldwide. The port of Emden became Volkswagen's most important shipping hub and Europe's third-largest car distribution center. On the factory floor, Beetle bodies were assembled, inspected, and subjected to strict quality checks. The marriage, when chassis, engine, and body were joined, marked a key milestone. Seats and wheels followed, and for the first time, each car was started and driven onto the dynamometer test line to verify engine performance and speed settings. Founded in 1964, the Emden plant employed around 8,000 workers. Today, it builds electric models like the ID.4, ID.7, and ID.7 Tourer. The Beetle's record was mixed. Surveys ranked it poorly for reliability, with just 44.8 points. Yet production expanded around the world, including Australia, Nigeria, and especially Mexico. Historic footage shows the Puebla plant in the early 2000s, with bodies dipped in anti-corrosion baths and painted by robotic arms. And although its silhouette remained timeless, the Beetle received more than 78,000 small updates over its life, from dashboard designs to hydraulic brakes. By 2003, Beetle production came to an end. After 65 years, more than 23 million had been built, making it the longest-running and highest-volume single-model platform in automotive history. To mark the occasion, Volkswagen released the final Ultima edition, a limited run of just 3,000 cars. In Mexico, the Beetle was affectionately known as the Vocho. New taxi regulations eventually ended its service there, as only four-door cars were permitted. In the United States, however, its popularity surged thanks to a groundbreaking advertising campaign. Think small. The very last Beetle now resides in Volkswagen's Auto Museum in Wolfsburg, a lasting symbol of Ferdinand Porsche's original design and an undisputed icon of the 20th century. From Europe, the story now moves across the Atlantic to the United States and inside Ford's Michigan truck plant in Wayne. In 1995, the factory built a record 37,600 Ford Broncos. Here, the production process began with the marriage. The moment when the engine, transmission, drive shafts, and axles were mounted to the chassis and the body lowered into place. Much like today's factories, components such as the front bumper could be installed quickly and efficiently. Quality control was carried out at the end of the main assembly line under the plant's proud motto, "First in quality, first in pride." For many owners, the Bronco of this era proved one of the most dependable vehicles they ever drove. Yet production paused after 1996, returning only in 2021 with the sixth generation. In 1994, all Broncos adopted V8 power as the 4.9-liter inline-six was dropped. That year, over 33,000 were built. Bodies were welded, sealed, and dipped in an anti-corrosion bath before being painted. An automated spray process even then. The fifth-generation Bronco was discontinued in 1996, replaced by the Ford Expedition the following year. Ford stated the decision was unrelated to the media attention surrounding the O.J. Simpson police chase, noting that sales had already been in decline. On the assembly line, workers fitted dashboards, connected wiring looms, installed seats and windows, and lowered the removable rear roof into place. Adhesive was applied to the windscreen frame before the glass was set by hand. Engines assembled in another part of the plant arrived complete and were mounted directly to the chassis before the body was joined. Lighting, bumpers, and trim followed, and each vehicle was then tested on a dynamometer to check engine performance, gearbox function, and electrical systems. This plant also produced the Ford F-150 alongside the Bronco. From 1987 to 1991, the fourth-generation Bronco was built here, with 54,000 units produced in 1990 alone, sharing the floor with the eighth-generation F-150. At the very end of the Ford assembly line, chrome emblems and logos were bonded in place, then polished to a shine. A senior inspector, a veteran of the plant with silver hair, signed off on final quality control, personally guaranteeing that each Bronco and F-150 met the company's standards. Only then were they ready to begin their lives on American roads. Across the Atlantic, Europe's third-largest car distribution port stood as a vital hub for the import and export of new vehicles. Inside the Volkswagen plant at Emden, 1970s Beetle body shells were assembled with precision, every step checked against a strict quality control list, a process not far removed from modern factory routines. The marriage stage saw the chassis and engine joined to the body, a defining moment in the build. Today, this same plant produces Volkswagen's electric ID.4, ID.7, and ID.7 Tourer models. In period, Beetle seats and wheels were installed in Germany before each car was started for the very first time and run on the dynamometer. Here, engine performance, gear changes, and other systems were tested. Nothing left to chance. Offered in a broad palette of colors and trim levels, the Beetle's appeal lay in its constant evolution. Unlike the East German Trabant, it benefited from incremental upgrades that kept demand strong well into the new millennium. When production ceased in Germany, assembly continued in Australia, Mexico, and Nigeria. Archival footage from Volkswagen's Puebla plant in Mexico shows complete shells dipped in anti-corrosion baths, then sprayed in their final colors by robotic arms. In this case, bright yellow. A period-correct VW badge was then affixed to the bonnet. Founded in 1964, the Emden factory had employed hundreds of thousands over the decades, with round-the-clock shifts keeping lines moving at full capacity. In Puebla, July 2003 marked the final chapter in Beetle production. After 65 years and more than 23 million units, it remained the longest-running and highest-volume single-model platform in history. To commemorate, Volkswagen built a limited Ultima Edition run, 30,000 cars, before loading them onto ferries bound for markets worldwide. Though its silhouette barely changed, the Beetle saw over 78,000 incremental updates over its lifetime, from subtle trim revisions to new dashboards, braking systems, and engines. In the end, the Type 1 had been produced on multiple continents, cementing its place as one of the most recognizable and enduring cars in history. Production of the Beetle in Mexico was made possible through agreements with companies such as Chrysler, as well as the Studebaker-Packard Corporation, which assembled imported cars in complete knockdown form. The Beetle entered the Mexican market in 1954, with official local production beginning a decade later. In Mexico, it was affectionately nicknamed the Vocho. A change in Mexico City taxi regulations, allowing only four-door vehicles to operate in an effort to reduce robberies, ultimately influenced Volkswagen's decision to end Beetle production there in 2003. One of the most recognizable silhouettes in automotive history, the Beetle also enjoyed enormous popularity in the United States thanks to Volkswagen's clever and enduring Think Small advertising campaign. Today, the very last Beetle can be seen at Volkswagen's Auto Museum in Wolfsburg, Germany, preserved as a tribute to one of the 20th century's true automotive icons. From West Germany, our journey moves behind the Iron Curtain to East Germany's Wartburg factory in Eisenach. Known formally as VEB Automobilwerk Eisenach, it had been building vehicles near the town since 1898. Here, the production process began in the foundry, where steel components for the engine were cast. The first model, the Wartburg 311, was built from 1956 to 1965. Its successor, the Wartburg 353, known in some export markets as the Wartburg Knight, would go on to have the longest production run of any model in the brand's history from 1966 to 1988. Tailgates and rear fenders were fashioned from glass fiber reinforced plastic, while painting was a mix of manual and machine spraying, followed by a polish using large rotating brushes. The 353 underwent several updates over its lifetime. In 1985, it received its most recognizable facelift, along with a revised engine layout and a new carburetor. Powerful ceiling-mounted cranes moved heavy assemblies around the plant. Domestically, Wartburgs were used extensively for government transport and as police vehicles. But in the planned economy of East Germany, private buyers often waited 10 to 15 years for delivery. With its forward-set center of gravity and front-wheel drive, the car exhibited the typical understeer of its layout, particularly in wet weather. Early models used a 993 cubic centimeter, two-stroke triple producing modest performance, paired with a 4-speed manual gearbox that drew criticism from some drivers. Wartburgs were nevertheless exported widely across Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and as far as South Africa, valued in foreign markets for their low price. In 1988, the final major modernization arrived. The Wartburg 1.3, fitted with a Volkswagen-designed 1.3-liter 4-stroke engine and a 5-speed gearbox in the deluxe specification. Features such as electronic ignition, fog lamps, an alarm system, and central locking were offered. Production ceased in April 1991, after which the factory was acquired by Opel. Today, Wartburg owners' clubs keep the marque's memory alive, and a handful of cars still appear at rallies across Europe, living reminders of an East German automotive legacy.